Hello everyone, it's time to talk about externalities. So, get ready for fun. Alright, let's examine some situations in which government intervention is actually necessary to facilitate efficient economic outcomes. A great deal of this class is building a cathedral to the market mechanism as the most productive way a society can allocate its productive resources. If we can have a competitive market, this is just transcendent. But there are situations where we've got basically asterisks in reality, where we need to have some kind of central figure facilitate efficiency. So sometimes the market doesn't deliver exactly what we need. When it doesn't, though, what's really important as economists is that we understand what those market failures look like, and when a government does intervene, how to do it as efficiently as possible so as to make problems much better and more efficient rather than worse, because government intervention certainly can make things less efficient. And less efficient is a polite way of saying, like, lots of people don't have jobs or lots of people are starving, just really, really horrible things. So what we need to do is understand how to be efficient. So we're going to study externalities in a general fashion. We'll talk about specifically negative and positive externalities and how to correct these market failures. So in general, externalities exist when an agent imposes a cost or a benefit on other agents, but don't have any kind of an incentive to care about what those do or don't do to others. They only care about themselves. So when agents impose costs or benefits on other agents, yet do not take those costs or benefits into account, that is, you are only caring about your own private costs and benefits. Well, that's the invisible hand. Care about yourself. What's wrong with that? Well, sometimes it imposes costs onto people who are not a part of a transaction, or fails to impose benefits that make society a better place. So when an agent does consider the costs and benefits they impose on others, we say they internalize the externality. With an unregulated externality, those costs and benefits are externalized onto others. That is, you're only thinking of yourself and you don't care about how your actions affect others. For instance, someone, let's call them Stan. I don't know anyone named Stan, so let's just have Stan be a person. Stan cares about their private costs and benefits. What do they care about? They care about going out tonight and having a great time. Well, what if they go out and they pick up some kind of a medical thing that could impose really big costs on people in their 60s and 70s? Is Stan thinking of that while he's partying or at the beach? No, he's thinking about Stan's own welfare. But if Stan picks up some unnamed mysterious medical thing and gives that to other people, Stan has put real costs in someone else's life. That is an externality. That is an externality. If you've ever lived in a dorm or an apartment and someone came home at 4 in the morning and woke you up, they weren't thinking of you. They were thinking of themselves. That's an externality. Or say climate change is going to start costing our state billions of dollars a year, or it already is, increasingly billions of dollars a year in lost tourism, energy bills, insurance, agriculture, and property values. As that happens, many of you maybe didn't make a lot of decisions that caused climate change, but you will be paying the cost for them. That's a much bigger externality than, say, waking somebody up because you came home irresponsibly loudly. Okay? But they're all externalities. Someone is imposing something on someone who is not a part of the original decision-making process. Stan might not care. Stan might think he's being a fun cat, right? But when it happens to you, when the cost comes to you, then it's not so carefree and fun. So, with externalities, private agents, that's any of us making our own rational, self-interested decisions, impose costs or benefits on all of society. We're only considering our private costs and our private benefits, not the social costs and social benefits. That is, we're not thinking of the total surplus. We're only thinking of our own private surplus. And when markets don't have externalities, this is a good thing. It guides us to produce goods or services that make us profits. It guides us to buy goods or services or engage in activities in our lives that give us utility. But if there are externalities, there are market failures. Now we're imposing stuff on people who don't have a right? Their invisible hand is not in play. Inefficiencies result. So when that happens, we have to have policy. We have to have a government in some capacity get involved. And policy here with externalities seeks to get agents to internalize the social costs and benefits. That is, the people who are imposing costs need to, in some way, understand those costs. And when that happens, we get a social optimum, or a regulated optimum, rather than a private optimum, or an unregulated optimum. Basically, externalities are like economic side effects. You know, when you watch an advertisement for a prescription drug, they'll advertise something that will make your life much, much better. But at the end, there's this real quick list of things that describe all the ways this could kill you, right? Markets are kind of like that. They're way better than any other way we've decided or we've experimented with or figured out as a society to organize our productive activity, right? Anytime you go with communism, fascism, feudalism, any other option, things are much, much, much worse. But we don't have a perfect system, and there are economic side effects. These are the externalities, right? So the advertisement here for markets would be drags billions of people out of poverty, extends life expectancies, makes our lives really easy and wonderful. But at the end, there's going to be a list of things like, may yield climate change that kind of destroys the whole system in itself eventually. So we got to be careful with externalities. They can be destabilizing, and we need to understand how to regulate them so that we can make sure the market system operates and is still what we choose as a society to organize our productive activity. So let's start with the negative externality. A negative externality is the cost that is imposed on those who are not a part of an economic activity or transaction. All right, we're going to focus on the cost part, and then a little later we'll get to the positive externality, which looks at benefits. So with a negative externality, there is a cost that is imposed on people, agents who are not a part of an economic activity or transaction. You will also hear these referred to in other books or in the media or whatever as negative spillovers or external costs. I prefer to call them negative externalities. If you hear those other terms, they mean the exact same thing. The problem here is that the private party does not have an incentive to consider its impact on society at large, right? When people come home late at night in the dorm or in the apartment shouting to their friends, they are not thinking about the cost they're imposing on other people's lives. Just like those who are polluting are not really thinking about how is this contributing to negative impacts to society as far as pollution and climate change go, and all the negative effects associated with that. They're thinking, I want to maximize profits. Just like the person who comes home loudly is thinking, I'm maximizing my utility. I'm having fun, right? People are thinking of their own benefits and costs. When Stan goes to the club during some kind of a pandemic, Stan is trying to maximize his utility. Stan is thinking only of Stan and not of the costs, both in terms of lost utility to others or to the healthcare costs or lost productivity that would result from them infecting 2 to 10 to 20 other people with some kind of a pandemic that could happen maybe in society. Okay. Is that too heavy-handed? I hope it is, because it's important. All right. For us, our example will be the owner of a factory wanting to maximize profits. I'll have that be me. I will be the capitalist and owner of the factory. And what do I want to do? Why do firms exist? They exist to maximize profits, right? So that means that I'm going to produce the profit maximizing quantity. How will I choose that? Marginal revenues equal marginal costs. Very good. Marginal revenues equal marginal costs. Everyone said loudly in unison, pleasing Dr. Wood and making him feel like his life has meaning. I'm going to set my marginal revenues equal to my marginal costs. And I'm going to produce the profit maximizing amount. Who am I thinking of? My firm. I'm thinking of my capital. As an individual factory owner, I don't consider what I'm doing to air pollution at large or taking into account how my pollution affects anyone. Imagine all of you people, let's have you be the people who live around my factory. Why don't they just find a better place to live? Ugh. And all of you people living near my factory, do you have anything to do with what I'm producing? Absolutely not. But what if I'm releasing a whole lot of smog and particulates into the air and I'm just dumping whatever byproducts of my production process out the back door? You have nothing to do with that decision. But does that affect you? Absolutely. So as a polluter, I'm only considering my private costs and benefits, and I'm not considering the social costs and benefits of pollution. I don't care what I'm doing to your property value. I don't care what I'm doing to you or your kids' health, and I don't care what I'm doing to, the ecosystem at large. That's not my problem. Now, does that make me evil? No, of course not. A lot of people, sure, Mr. Burns from The Simpsons exists, but most people are just trying to maximize profits and make their lives better and, do what's best for their firm, their family, their shareholders, whoever they're beholden to, whatever their incentives are. It's generally about maximizing profits. So the capitalist system is what it is. We've set up a system where it's good to be a shark, maximize profits, be competitive. And so you can't get mad at a shark for doing shark things. And that's why there are asterisks to the system. That's why there are market failures. Again, that does not mean we should throw out the market system at all. It just means we need to recognize and be really, really honest and reflective about when it works and when it doesn't. And when it doesn't, how to fix it. So the problem here, private costs and private benefits are what I care about. And you probably care about your private costs and private benefits. These are the social costs and benefits. All of yours collectively make up the social costs and benefits that I'm ignoring as I put my pollution out there and, ruin your home value and make you sick and make it so that the water is polluted and the ecosystem is suffering. So we need to be really brutally honest about what pollution does. And a lot of people don't want to be. So we need to define the social and benefits and the social costs of pollution. Now, many people will go, there's no social benefits of pollution, but of course there are. We produce goods and services, right? That means that there are things that people consume that make their lives better, jobs are created, everything is done for a reason in the system. People are trying to make themselves better off. Do you like your phone? Do you like your computer? Do you like flying home? Do you like air conditioning when you live in a subtropical climate like Florida? Absolutely. There are benefits to pollution. So we have to be honest about that. There are benefits to polluting. We also have to be honest that there are costs of pollution. Pollution can cause all kinds of problems, right? We've got illnesses, cancer, asthma, all sorts of problems that result because of pollution. Pollution causes smog and acid rain that makes people sick and denigrates property and kills wildlife and trees. These things really do cause problems. And of course, climate change is the biggest social cost of all, where this is going to start costing us billions of dollars in opportunity costs and lost productivity and in direct costs going forward. Florida alone is going to be facing $30 billion to $50 billion in climate change costs in 10 years, 10 to the next 30 years. It's going to start, it is already, and it's going to only increase at an increasing rate how costly climate change will cost a state like Florida. So, wherever we have total concepts, we know that marginal concepts are right behind it. And marginal are the things we need to choose in order to get the best total outcome. So our marginal social benefit of pollution is the additional benefit to society we get from generating another unit of pollution or whatever this activity is. But the marginal social cost of pollution is the additional cost we get as we generate another unit of pollution. So there are benefits in total and costs in total from polluting, but at the margin, as we pollute a little bit more, there's going to be a little bit more benefit to polluting and a little bit more cost to polluting, and maybe a lot more cost of polluting as we pollute more and more. So once we understand marginal concepts, we need to use those to get the social optimum. It shouldn't be surprising that in order to get the socially optimal level of pollution, we need to find where the marginal social benefit to polluting equals the marginal social cost of polluting. When we do that, we will get the largest possible total benefits from polluting compared to total cost of polluting. We want to generate all the benefits we can from polluting that are relatively optimal compared to the costs. How do we do that? Marginal equals marginal. When your marginal social benefits equal your marginal social costs, you will have polluted all that you can where you have increased the benefits from polluting relative to the costs to the optimal amount to get the biggest difference possible between the total benefits of polluting and the total cost of polluting. I want that difference to be as big as possible. The socially optimal level of pollution is just the level of pollution that society would choose when the costs and benefits to society are fully internalized. That is, when we've actually done a calculation of what the benefits and costs of polluting are. The problem with externalities is that we often don't calculate or don't recognize the costs to the pollution. Those costs are just foisted onto people who are not a part of the transaction. So to be socially optimal with respect to things like pollution, things like climate change, things that are externality problems in general, is we have to fully internalize those benefits and costs to recognize that, yes, there's benefits to polluting, yes, there's costs to polluting. This will be the most efficient level of pollution possible. Of course, we could pollute too little, right? The optimal level of pollution generally is not zero. We can gain benefits from polluting by engaging in productive activity. When maybe a pandemic strikes, you might recognize it's probably not optimal for everyone to just sit in their house and no one drive. I mean, it is maybe from a public health perspective, but when it comes to engaging in productive activity, we're not going to be generating much of it. And there's going to be untold costs in that respect to our lives as well as we go forward. This is a difficult balancing act. But it's certainly possible to also pollute too much. There's been lots of times when the costs of pollution are ignored and the social costs of pollution get massively high because we don't internalize them. People who pollute push those costs of pollution onto others, and at the end of the day, you get, say, rivers and lakes to catch fire in places like Cleveland, where bodies of water traditionally aren't supposed to catch on fire. So, let's first graphically examine the private outcome. So let's start modeling this issue and trying to understand it a little better and see if we arrive at an optimal solution. So first we're going to graphically examine the private outcome to ask what happens when the polluter, as we say, is myopic. Meaning, by saying myopic, I mean they only care about their own private costs and benefits and aren't thinking about their social costs and benefits. So let's expand the screen and do some drawings. All right, so I'm going to title this Negative Externality. Title this Negative Externality. And on my y-axis, right, we're going to have things that we can monetize like we have all semester long. And so that is going to entail my marginal social benefits and my marginal social costs. So I'll write MSB for marginal social benefits, comma, marginal social costs for our marginal social costs. And on my x-axis, like everything else, we'll put Q for quantity. And I'll put that this is our pollutant, as we're doing air pollution from my factory as our illustrative example here. Okay, so to begin, let's have some marginal social benefits. That is, we're going to look at starting at 0 and going to, infinity for our quantity, the additional benefit we get as a society from polluting each next unit. So, marginal social benefits are going to be, in some capacity, downward sloping generally. I'll label that MSB. It's our marginal social benefit curve. And these tend to be downward sloping as, like, polluting a little bit tends to give a lot of additional benefit, right? If there are no flights at all, if there are no roads at all, if there's nothing at all, if we start to use it, there's going to be huge increases in benefits, right? We start producing smartphones, huge increase in benefits and productivity for society. But if we just keep polluting, if we just give everyone a private plane to fly jets everywhere, or everyone has 10 phones themselves, what's going to happen? The additional benefit to the production process that creates those, that generates the pollution, it's going to add smaller and smaller additional benefits to society each time we emit a pollutant. So basically there's diminishing marginal returns to generating the pollution. I'll just draw it as a straight line though, as a simplification. Now our marginal social costs are going to be upward sloping. I'll call that MSC. And these marginal social costs are upward sloping because, a little bit of pollution tends to not do too much damage. But as we pollute more and more and more, ecosystem services get overwhelmed. They're not able to be resilient. We start to cause bigger and bigger problems. So a little bit of pollution probably isn't going to cost too much. But as we engage in a lot of the pollutant, now, again, your water resources aren't going to be able to rebound and keep themselves clean. You're going to be collecting enough, smog and particulate in the air that people are starting to get sick. When people get sick, they miss work. They can't go do productive activities. Other firms are hurt, right? So we're adding bigger and bigger and bigger costs as we pollute more and more units. So as pollution goes up, those marginal social costs to polluting will increase. Now, let's think about the private outcome. Here I am. I own the factory. There's all you, the people who own the low-value homes around my factory. Who's benefiting from emitting this pollutant? Is it you? No. It's all me. It's all me. Oh, and it's nice. So, what happens here? In a private outcome, in a market outcome here with no government involvement, I'm the one who enjoys the marginal social benefits, and whoever's consuming from me. But in general, I'm getting most of these additional benefits to polluting as the factory owner. And am I feeling these costs? Not likely, right? I probably live somewhere nice far away, and I am not smelling or breathing whatever's coming out of this factory. So, what that means is, I get all of the benefits, and you get all the costs. I get all the benefits, and I externalize marginal social costs entirely onto you people. I only care about my private costs and private benefits. So, as a producer, I'm going to produce the profit maximizing amount. How much am I going to use a pollutant? If I can pollute, right, it's a cheap way to produce. Would I voluntarily clean up all my production, or would I just let stuff out of the factory and dump anything out the back, right? I'm going to pollute so long as it minimizes my costs and maximizes my profits. So if I'm going to consider using this pollutant, let's say I start at 0 use of the pollutant. If I start producing and using this pollutant in my production process, sorry, I'm kicking my speakers here. As I start at 0 here and I start producing, I'm going to get a huge additional benefit from using this pollutant. Will I do it? Yeah, because I face no cost. This curve doesn't matter to me. I'm going to continue to pollute so long as what? So long as there's any additional benefit to using the pollutant. I'm going to use the quantity from 0 all the way up to the point where marginal social benefits are 0. I'm enjoying all of the benefits of using this pollutant. I can put it into my production process, and as I do, I'm getting a benefit each time I use it. It's helping me produce, helping me make a profit. And so long as there is a positive benefit for me to use the pollutant in the production process, I'm going to do it. I'm absolutely going to do it. I'm oversetting marginal revenues equal to marginal costs, trying to maximize profits. And if this helps me out, anytime I can pollute and get additional benefit, I'm going to. I'm only going to stop when there's no more benefit for me to pollute. So, given I don't care about what this pollutant does, my marginal social benefit in the market outcome equals 0. I don't care, not my problem. Got it? That seems fine. I mean, from my perspective, I'm just doing what I can to maximize profits. Don't be mad at me. Problem is, this curve does exist, and you are the ones who are paying the price because your kid's sick and you have to miss work, or you're sick, or your property becomes useless or less valuable. What do we have? Well, when I produce quantity market, the marginal social costs are very high. If I put in that quantity and look at what I'm doing to society, let's measure that via the y-axis. And let's say that's $1,000. Q market is imposing $1,000 in marginal social costs when I produce Q market units of the pollutant. Let's say that's 1 million tons of whatever this is. If I produce 1 million units of this, I'm producing until there's no more benefit to me using this pollutant, and this results in me imposing $1,000 at the margin on each additional unit I produce onto society. So that's your, having to go to the doctor, you missing a paycheck, whatever that is. So, million, 1,000, these numbers can get real big real quick if I'm imposing $1,000 in marginal social costs when I produce 1 million units. E. Is this efficient? No. We are not arriving at an optimal solution because marginal does not equal marginal. This is inefficient. This is bad for society. In the market outcome, marginal social costs are greater than marginal social benefits. We are imposing more in costs than we need to. We're going to make the total cost of pollution way too high relative to the total benefits from polluting and making this productive good or service. That is, we're doing a lot of harm here. And it implies that in this example and in all negative externality problems, if there is no intervention in the market, quantity of whatever activity we're talking about here, our air pollutant in this case, is too high. Pollution is too high. This is no good. When marginal does not equal marginal, we are inefficient. That is, we are cutting into social welfare and making things worse. Okay. We need solutions to this problem. This is a problem. We need solutions. So what can we do? Well, there's a few options. The first of which is command and control. That is rules, environmental standards. This is when a government regulator specifies actions that can be taken or cannot be taken by economic agents who are being myopic and imposing social costs on others. Several of these have been used successfully in the United States and around the world to reduce air and water pollution or damaging behaviors of various sorts. Like cars have to meet certain miles per gallon requirements, factories only being allowed to emit certain levels of pollution, communities being required to treat their wastewater. I particularly like that one. But this is often not the most economically efficient approach because it does not get everyone to face the same costs. Let me say it this way. Command and control schemes pick winners and losers unintentionally. I will show you an example in a couple of minutes to demonstrate this. But it often causes firms to not reduce the externality at the lowest possible cost. When everyone is forced to meet the same mandate, it's going to be easier for certain firms or certain actors to meet the mandate than others, and it will therefore pick them as a winner versus others. And so economists tend to prefer regulatory schemes that allow agents to make more choice than just this is the rule and you have to follow it. these schemes are necessary in certain contexts when the only way to monitor the situation is to see someone's behavior, whether they are doing something or not doing something. So there is room for this scheme, this regulatory scheme, as a means to improve social efficiency. It has worked in lots of places. But for me, as an environmental and energy economist, it is not my first choice. It's kind of the second to third choice I would go to when solving a negative externality problem. Doesn't mean they shouldn't happen, and sometimes they're great. Sometimes it's really good to just say, here's a requirement, and go ahead and meet it. But if it's possible, this isn't my first choice because it only lets you follow one rule, yes or no. I prefer agents to be able to pick their best marginal choice along an x-axis instead of being forced to get one choice. So we'll look at that a little deeper, but first let's talk about something I like a great deal, and that is the Pigouvian tax for Arthur Cecil Pigou. Pigouvian taxes are, in this case, an emissions tax. If you've heard of anyone ever talk about a carbon tax with respect to climate change, it is a type of Pigouvian tax. And a Pigouvian tax is a tax aimed at reducing external costs and getting private economic agents to internalize their negative impact on society at large. So the economist here must set the Pigouvian tax to where marginal social costs are equal to the marginal social benefits so that we generate the optimal level of pollution. How does this work? How does this induce the polluter to internalize external costs? Well, you have to pay a tax to pollute. In our example here, this would be the government says, if you want to emit this pollution, if you want to emit this pollutant because it's good for your production process, then you pay this tax each time you emit a unit of it. What does that do? It makes me consider a cost of polluting. The problem with the negative externality and why it's a market failure is because there's no price to the polluter for polluting. Why markets are so great is that price sends signals. When you're a consumer in a market that's working, you go, hey, look, I want that good. I will pay that price. Or that good's cool, but I won't pay that price. As a firm, you say, I'd love to be participating at that price, or I would not. But with a negative externality, what we have here is a market with no price for the good. There is no cost to the polluter to pollute it. They don't have to pay in order to do it. There's no price that anyone looks at and says that's worth it to pollute or not. And so the Pigouvian tax creates that missing price. It imposes a cost on the firm to pollute, and so now it gives them an incentive to care about what they're doing. Okay, let's look at the Pigouvian tax and look at how it prices this pollutant and forces me as a polluter to do what's socially optimal rather than just privately optimal. So let's look at it. What we need to do, and I'm not saying this calculation is super easy. Again, that's why we have economists, and that's why we do economics. If it was easy, everyone would do it. We have to calculate where marginal social benefits equal marginal social costs. And there is a whole field of economics, environmental economics, where we study and we learn this. And I did it in grad school, and you should too if you're really into this stuff. Otherwise, don't. But it's awesome. Let's set our marginal social benefits equal to our marginal social costs. I'll call these marginal social benefit regulated and marginal social cost regulated, and I'll make you bigger so you can see that. So I've got marginal social benefits regulated and marginal social costs regulated. What we're doing here is figuring out when we calculate this, we are now going to make this the Pigouvian tax. So let's say these are equal at $500 for the pollutant. What we're going to be doing then is essentially setting, I'll make it orange for some reason, this Pigouvian tax that would go forever if you draw it across this way. It's a Pigouvian tax at $500. And what it says is if you want the privilege to use this pollutant right here, you pay $500 a pop to use it. Okay? What does that do to me as the factory owner? Now instead of going, well, it benefits me a whole lot, right? It looks like that first unit's benefiting me like $1,200 to pollute. Great. I'm going to use it. And even if it benefits me a penny to use it, I'm still going to because it's helping me maximize profits. And I don't care because that curve doesn't exist to me. It only exists to society, to all of you. But when there's the Pigouvian tax in play, now I have to pay $500. Oh, well, that's more annoying. But what do? I look at this first unit of pollution when I make my optimal marginal choice now and say, well, if I'm getting $1,200 in benefits from using this pollutant, and it costs me $500 to do it, well, we're still $700 better off, $1,200 minus $500, still $700 better off if I do it. So hell yeah, let's use that pollutant. We're going to be better. We're producing. Things are good. Of course, I, personally would hate to pay it, but I'm still going to do it because I'm better off. Right? And I'm going to keep polluting. I'm going to increase quantity so long as this marginal social benefit is greater than or equal to the Pigouvian tax. Right? If I get $1,000 of benefit versus my $500 tax, I'm going to do it. If I get $700 in benefit versus the $500 in tax, I'm going to do it. If I get 501 in benefits versus the 500 tax, I'm going to do it. And if I get 500 in benefits and 500 in tax, I know, and as we've practiced all semester, that's when I say, I've done the best that I can. I've now added as much marginally to my benefits to make my total benefits as big as possible compared to what I'm adding to my marginal costs. My marginal cost of polluting now privately is $500 per unit. And so as I do that, I'm only going to pollute until my marginal social benefits are equal to my marginal social costs of 500. And then what do? Stop. I'll call that Q regulated because under this regulatory system or regulatory scheme, I am now going to pollute only Q regulated amount of the pollution. Let's say that's 500,000 units. Does it mean I don't pollute at all? No, but the Pigouvian tax gets me to internalize my marginal social costs such that I pollute in an optimal fashion. Now what am I doing to society? I am imposing only the marginal social costs that are optimal relative to the marginal social benefits, so that society gets the biggest possible benefits from polluting relative to the costs. We're best off as possible. So in the regulated outcome, what happens? My marginal social benefits equal my marginal social costs. My quantity, it's optimal. Or shout out to my good friend Dr. Beekman. We can also call this Q baby bear because this quantity is just right. This is the optimal outcome. Okay? Now, whether we use the command and control or the Pigouvian tax, it's important that we get there. Marginal social benefits equal marginal social costs, Q optimal. So you could, as a regulator, just say, we're going to make this much of the pollution. Everyone gets to make this much of the pollution or whatever. Again, I'm going to show you in a second why that's not my favorite way. Again, it's fine in some contexts when administrating and kind of policing the system is expensive or difficult to do. But the Pigouvian tax is great because it lets each agent figure their best marginal decision individually. And I'll show you that again in just a second. Now, the Pigouvian tax is so swell to me because we are raising money that we can use to do a lot of pretty good things. For instance, these can be used to offset some of these marginal social costs of the pollution. It could be used to clean up the pollution or to compensate the people who are being hurt by it. Or we can use them to offset distortionary taxes that we don't like so much. Things like excise taxes or sales taxes that are regressive. We can replace taxes that create inefficiency with taxes that impose efficiency. So this is, for me, the best possible situation we can have as far as taxing goes, because this makes things more efficient. And why context always matters in economics, right? If you have a competitive market, you put a tax in play, you're going to create inefficiency. But when you have a market failure or a failed market, and you use taxes, you can make things more efficient. So again, always be careful when people are telling you taxes are always bad, taxes are always good, government's always good, government's always bad. Because the answer is always in the economics. The answer is always in looking at understanding the scientific context of how people are behaving and the structure of the market in which we're operating. So please be a wise person and take that away from this class. That context matters, especially when things are so polarized in our current political climate. Okay. Sorry, I just care about this because, you know, fate of the world and stuff. All right. Let me reset the board and then we'll get started again. So, phone break. Let's now look at why the Pigouvian tax is more efficient than command and control. So the tax ensures that the marginal benefit of pollution is equal across all polluters. The environmental standard does not. As I alluded to earlier, the command and control scheme, the environmental standard, will pick winners and losers. The benefit is that they're easy to enforce and monitor, but I prefer Pigouvian tax, and generally economists do as well, because it allows the individual agent to respond optimally according to their own incentives. So let's say we have two factories, factory A and factory B, right? Let's say factory A is a newer factory, better equipped to reduce pollution. Factory B, our red line here, is going to have a much larger preference to pollute. So older production technology, they've generally been using these pollutants to make their good or service. Everybody does, but say factory B, the red line here, has a higher benefit to pollute in general. So let's say we're in a private market outcome and nobody is being regulated by the government. So when it comes to this quantity of pollution, both of these firms would say the same thing. I'm going to leave marginal social costs out here so we can just emphasize why Pigouvian taxes are preferred if possible. Without a government, that marginal social cost curve is ignored anyway, so even more. Factory A in factory B, they look at these at this pollutant and they say, well, I get a positive marginal benefit from polluting, so I'm going to use the pollutant in my production process. And they're going to both pollute until they produce 600 units of pollution. So that would be the quantity in the market unregulated outcome. So each is going to produce 600 units for a total of 1,200 units to society. Well, what if we decide that we want to have half of that? Let's say we want 600 units of pollution to be produced in total. That is the socially optimal level of pollution. Well, if we have a command and control scheme, what we do here is come through and say, this is the command and control scheme. Everybody can produce 300 units. That way we get 600 total in society. Now what does this do? Right, so if this was Q market to each, this is Q reg to each. Each of them is going to produce 300 units, quantity in the regulated outcome. But what does that do? If we look at the marginal benefits to pollute here, what do we see? The marginal benefit to B is about 600, and the marginal benefit to A is about 300. So what does that mean? It means that firm B really wants to pollute another unit, whereas firm A, they have a lower preference to pollute another unit. Because, again, firm A probably has cleaner production technology. They can switch away from using this pollutant easier. So what has this done? This has picked firm A as a winner. Firm B, who really values polluting another unit, they don't have the option. So this would be the regulator basically picking one firm to have an advantage in the market over another. So this is why this is not everybody's favorite way, and it's best when it's difficult to monitor and enforce a particular regulatory system for negative externality. Now what if instead we said, let's have a Pigouvian tax, and let's set that Pigouvian tax at $400 in order to get 600 total units. Because what? When we look at this, firm B is going to pollute so long as their marginal benefits are greater than equal to their new marginal cost, the tax, to pollute. And they're going to pollute up to, I'll call that Q reg B, 400 units. While firm A is going to pollute only up to 200 units. So I'll call that Q reg A. So firm B and firm A together, 400 plus 200, make 600 units. We have cut pollution in half, but what has happened? Firm A looks at this problem and says, it's only worth it for us to use 200 units of the pollutant. We can do other things. We don't want to pay this tax. But for firm B, they don't mind paying the tax because they have such a benefit to using the pollutant in the production process. So you can see when it comes to the Pigouvian tax, we have firms responding optimally to their own individual incentives. And so that is highly preferential to the economist, that these firms can respond the way they want to, and we still get the socially optimal level of pollution. Awesome. All right. There is another system we can use to mitigate negative externalities, and that is the system of tradable permits, also called cap and trade. Tradable emissions permits are basically licenses that are produced by the regulator that allow an agent to emit a certain quantity of pollution. And these licenses can be bought or sold. Now, this is just like the Pigouvian tax. We've studied quotas, and when we put a quota in place in a competitive market, they create problems. They generate deadweight loss. But when there is a market failure and we're trying to create a market for something that imposes real costs and benefits, a quota system can improve efficiency. So I want to represent U of Wyoming, University of Wyoming, where I got my PhD. Tom Crocker is one of the people who came up with this idea. And we are just an awesome environmental, natural resource, energy economics school. So a little shout out once a semester here. So the tradable permit scheme recognizes that it does cost different agents different amounts to reduce their pollution. The tradable permit scheme is going to recognize that firm B has a higher preference for polluting than does firm A. As you can see here, when given the option with the tax, firm B will keep polluting and paying the tax, while firm A will stop using the pollution to a greater degree so they don't have to pay as much of the tax. The cap and trade scheme takes note of this and also provides incentives to reduce the costliness of pollution. So it's a pretty cool idea. So how does this work? The government or the regulator puts out the number of permits that equalize marginal social benefits and marginal social costs of pollution. You do your best to figure out what is Q-regulated in the market, and then you create those number of licenses and you distribute them to the parties who pollute. Then those parties are allowed to trade their licenses. You're allowed to buy and sell them. So what happens? If you can cheaply reduce the pollution that you generate, you sell your excess permits to make money. This now incentivizes that the firm reduce their pollution. Now we're really creating a price to pollute and letting you capitalize on figuring out how to not pollute. So if you can not pollute, you can sell your permits to people who need them and make money. So those who need excess permits, that would be our firm B here, can purchase them from more efficient firms so that they have a right to pollute the optimal amount for them. There are wrinkles to this, right? The government can put out a couple more pollution emissions than are necessary and start buying them back across time. So it doesn't have to go straight to QReg. But what's most important here is that this incentivizes efficiency and the reduction of the negative externality. So in our example, what happens if firm A and firm B are both given 300 permits and the price of the permit is $400? What we have is, right, a marginal cost to pollute, just like we have in the Pigouvian tax. And there's an opportunity to now earn $400 a pop if you can sell these permits. So what's going to happen? Well, we give each one of them $300. They value them differently at $300, right? Firm B has a $600 marginal benefit to pollute there, whereas firm A only has a $300 marginal benefit to pollute there. Firm B is going to go, we'd like to buy, and firm A is going to go, we'd like to sell. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen if it's $400 a pop? Well, we're going to get essentially the same outcome in this case that we've drawn here. Firm A is going to try and sell 100 of their permits, and firm B is going to be out there trying to buy 100 permits. And so now firm A can basically profit off of not polluting. And it really gives all firms, including firm B, now an incentive to try and figure out how to pollute less. Private industry is very clever, and they come up with just ingenious solutions to problems like this. So if we go like, well, we have to buy these permits now, what would we like to do? Not buy these permits. Also, we'd like to sell these permits. Hey, you guys, all of you, figure out how to not pollute. We're going to make a lot of money. Firms do this. So by improving how you pollute, you can enable your firm to sell permits and profit. A real-life example of this is what the United States did with sulfur dioxide in 1990. Through the 80s, there were problems with acid rain from sulfur dioxide emissions from factories in the Rust Belt. of our country. And there was a plan in place to put a command and control scheme and in place to solve this problem. And the cost estimate to employ a command and control scheme was going to be $6.1 billion. And the plan was we need to get from 17.3 million tons of the pollution to 10 million tons. And we think this is going to cost us $6.1 billion to create and administer, monitor, and get this job done. Occasionally people listen to the economists. They tried a cap and trade scheme. So when this was put in place, the program was executed at 75% less cost than it would have cost the taxpayer with a command and control scheme at its best estimate. And right, government estimates are sometimes inaccurate. Usually we estimate too little, so 6.1 billion is probably the minimum that would have cost. But the cap and trade scheme got the pollutant 25% below allowable levels at 75% less cost. So the goal was 17.3 million to 10 million at $6.1 billion cost. It went from 17.3 million to 7.6 million at $1.7 billion in cost. We got below the 10 million, and instead of being $6.1 billion, it cost $1.7 billion. How often do policies come in at less cost and be that effective? Economists, they're okay. Now, I should mention the Coase theorem as a private solution to externalities problems. This one gets mentioned. Some people very vigorously support or denigrate this policy. And it is because this is a private solution to externality problems. This is keeping the government out of the business of command and control, Pigouvian tax, or cap and trade schemes. And it is a private solution that gives property rights to somebody involved in the externality. So you give, let's say we have two parties disagreeing about like a stream between their properties. You give property rights to one of the agents, and then you allow them to negotiate, and figure out the solution for themselves. The issue is that this only holds if transaction costs are zero, or let's just say low. Transaction costs, as we've talked about, are the costs to individuals of doing business. So this is the cost of communication, negotiation, getting your lawyers involved, the time and the opportunity costs of doing this solution. The Coase theorem says that if those transaction costs are low, you can let two people negotiate over an externality. The issue is this holds for two neighbors and not for society. This doesn't work for social problems because, you know, I've got 30 of you in a class at a time, and I guarantee you that the 30 of us can't agree on pizza toppings. So we're certainly not going to get 30 of us to agree on an externality problem. Nor will we get 22 million Floridians or 330 million Americans to agree on some kind of policy with respect to a pollutant or something causing climate change. So the Coase theorem is fine for neighbors, but it doesn't work for social problems because it is impossible due to transaction costs to get people to get together to solve these problems. Just doesn't work. People won't agree. And Coase himself said that. The Coase theorem's misunderstood by people who like it and hate it. Next, let's talk about positive externalities. We need something positive in these challenging times, right? Okay. Positive externality is the benefit that is imposed on those who are not a part of an economic activity or transaction. We also call these positive spillovers or external benefits. And the problem is that private parties do not have an incentive to consider their impact on society. Again, private agents are only interested in their own private costs and private benefits, and that's understandably so. And when it comes to positive externalities, what's going on here is that agents are not considering how their behavior would benefit all of society at large. I'll use my public education as an example. I went to K through 12 public school and got my PhD at a public research university. So I'm somebody who has used public education, and we'll just use that as an illustrative device. Some other possible positive externalities could be how space travel has created all kinds of benefits for us in terms of all the things we love in our lives. Y'all like these things, right? Or how research and development has created vaccines that have made a whole host of diseases that used to kill us as children virtually eradicated. There are incredible benefits that those researchers, that public education as a whole, push onto all of society, and that we as individual agents don't think about when we make our own choices. So, you want an education. That's why you're in this course, right? You want better earning potential, you want to expand your mind, you want to be a better and more complete human being who is in touch with thousands of years of Western education and how it enriches the soul, and philosophy makes you a better person, and so on. Just like this applied philosophy of economics makes the world a brighter place. But as a student, you're only considering your private costs and your private benefits. You don't think about the social costs and social benefits of education. You don't think about how, as a more productive person, you enrich the workforce and society as a whole. You don't think about when you learn about economics and political science and philosophy and mathematics, you make our republic a better place because you're an educated, thoughtful person. You don't think about how you're enriching culture in the world as you become a more educated person. Your education affects lots of other people other than yourself, because I'm putting it in a really, really upstanding, nice way. We could look at it as the other way. You're not shivving somebody in a Walmart parking lot for their wallet. That's another way we could look at this. So, there are social benefits and social costs to an education. As I just alluded to, a better informed citizenry makes better decisions. A more productive citizenry creates more productive activity and enriches all of society. We have less crime and violence. But there are social costs to an education. We have to pay for this educational system. That means that there's a direct and opportunity cost that exists because we have to pay for this education. We spend money on it, and we don't spend money on other things as a consequence of that. So wherever we have our total benefits and total costs, we also have our social benefit, our marginal and costs and our marginal benefits. So we have a marginal social benefit of education. That is the additional benefit to society of producing another education. There's different ways we could calculate this. It could be, if 100,000 more educations cause the crime rate to fall and cause GDP to go up and cause voter turnout to increase. We could aggregate all the ways that this makes us better. But every time you change the number of educations, it causes additional benefits to all of society, not just to you. The marginal social costs of education are the increasing costs we get as we increase the number of educations provided. So that is, as we have 100,000 more educations, we have to spend on that, and we can't buy an Abrams tank, like I say here, or some miles of interstate highway. There are costs to society if we engage in the production of public education. So the socially optimal level of education is the level of education that we choose as a society when we fully internalize all the costs and benefits to all of society. Where will that be? It's going to be at the intersection of the marginal social benefit and the marginal social cost curve, right? Let me get the board set up. Let's look at the positive externality now. So, let's have a quantity of public schools here, and I will demonstrate how educated I am by correctly spelling public schools. And then I will put marginal social benefits and marginal social costs on the y-axis and title it positive externality. And education will be our illustrative device, and I'll make you big so you can see after I point out we're going to work through a positive externality to look at the private outcome before we look at a government solution. So, positive externality, marginal social benefits, marginal social costs, quantity of public schools. So, the model is going to look very similar to our negative externality picture because marginal social benefits will be downward sloping for positive externalities. When it comes to something like a public school, when we build a first one in a community or metro area, we're going to get very large additional benefits. And there will continue to be benefits for providing each additional school. But at some point, if every building is a school, we're not going to get very big additional benefits from building yet another school. So there are declining marginal social benefits. And the marginal social costs tend to increase. Right? Devoting some resources to education, it's not going to be very costly. But as we devote more and more resources to education, those opportunity costs, in addition to the explicit costs, will go up and up and up as we are at some point going to be neglecting other obligations as a society like roads or something if all we do is schools. So let's think about this. If we are on our own trying to provide an education, think of the Dark Ages. Think of countries without central governments. How many public schools get provided? Think of space exploration in the 50s and 60s. What did it take without a government? What happened? Do we get enough public schools? Well, do we get schools in general? Very, very few. You get, in the Dark Ages, monks and nuns reading. In countries without an educational system, small, inefficiently small number of just private schools exist. So what do we get? If it's just up to us to provide our own education, we're going to have the quantity in the market be zero. Right? If this is on you only, why? Because you're not thinking of your marginal social benefits. You're only going to be thinking of the marginal social cost. So if you're going to provide yourself with an education and nothing is there, just think of it of yourself, in the Dark Ages, like, will I learn to read? Will our community have a school? Will there be schools in the whole of the country? What will people do without the government? Well, generally they're going to be thinking, well, this is very costly. This is all we care about. And as an individual, I don't care about the marginal social benefit. I don't care how my education impacts all of society. The only thing that matters to me is probably surviving today. So what am I going to devote my resources to? Not this. Not this at all. So what we have in a private outcome is marginal social benefits and the market outcome are very, very high. Very little education takes place, and the additional benefit, if we start providing educations, would be very large, right? It's really, really, really useful if, people learn how to read. We tend to do better when people can, create and participate in a representative democracy or, know decent medical procedures. Education can be really, really, really valuable. And our marginal social cost in the market outcome is essentially zero because we're not paying for it at all. So there is no additional cost. It's providing nothing. So this is the market outcome. Is this efficient? Is it efficient when the marginal social benefits exceed the marginal social costs? No, it is not. Why? Quantity here is too low. Quantity is too low. This is inefficient. Well, don't we want our benefits bigger than our costs? We get no benefits here because there's no education. The marginal social benefits are really high. That means we would get huge total benefits by producing these educations. And we would get small contributions to total cost to society by starting to produce educations. We could make ourselves way better if we started to provide this positive externality. So what's the result in terms of our quantity and our marginal social benefits and marginal social costs? The marginal social benefits are high. The marginal social costs are low. Hey, that'd be a good meteorologist, wouldn't it? Probably not. And what do we have? We have too little quantity being produced. We are not at a socially optimal level. Agents are myopic here. Agents are myopic. Why don't we get an efficient outcome? We don't get an efficient outcome because agents are myopic and they don't care about the marginal social benefits. Why would you? All you care about is the private costs that you would have to deal with in order to just create public educations out of nothing. So, how do we solve this problem? We go to Pigou. Oh, we go to Pigou. We can use a Pigouvian subsidy, which is a payment that encourages the activity so we can actually get some external benefits. Right now, we're getting virtually zero. If a Pigouvian subsidy is put in play, then it encourages and incentivizes the creation of this positive externality that is currently not taking place. That is, we can subsidize educations. Right? The federal or state government could pay this community to build a public school, or you could look at it again from the individual level and go, have I ever gotten a grant or a scholarship or someone paid me to go to school in some capacity? You've been Pigouvian subsidized. Cool. Let's model this. What do we need to do? According to Pigou, we need to set the marginal social benefits equal to the marginal social costs. I'll call those marginal social benefits and marginal social costs regulated. And that is, what we'll do is we'll offer this payment of a Pigouvian subsidy if you agree to do this activity, Q. And when will people do that? We'll give you the Pigouvian subsidy to do it. People will do that so long as the additional benefit, if the additional cost, let me rephrase that. If the additional cost to producing the education is less than the Pigouvian subsidy. Sorry, my brain was lagging, just like some of these online tools have been this week. We will continue to engage in this activity so long as the additional cost that we face, this marginal social cost curve that we have to pay, is less than the subsidy we get. So you give us the subsidy to do this education, we're going to go, that subsidy is greater than what I have to pay to do it. Let's absolutely do it. You're going to give me this amount to do this activity? This is what it costs me? This is what you give me? Yes, I'm better off by doing it. And I'm going to keep doing it until what? Until the subsidy is just equal to the marginal social costs. That is, we're going to produce Q-regulated, the optimal number of public schools. As soon as the marginal social cost equals the Pigouvian subsidy, now we know when to stop. Now we know when to stop. That is, this is kind of the marginal benefit we're being given in order to produce the positive externality. So long as that marginal benefit that we are being given is greater than or equal to the private cost we face, Now we are internalizing the optimal marginal social benefits. That is, the quantity that would generate the biggest possible benefits to education versus the costs. So in the regulated outcome, what do we end up getting? We get marginal equal marginal. Marginal social benefits equal marginal social costs. We've done a benefit cost analysis, and we're going to make ourselves optimal. We're going to go Q optimal. Again, feel free to call it Q baby bear. It's much, it's just much more a precious name, you know, because quantity is just right. And this is great because now we are efficient. We're producing just the right amount of educations such that the marginal social benefits to education just equals the marginal social costs. We get the optimal quantity, Q-regulated, of this positive externality. All right, that was my Chris Collinsworth into the screen thing. I hope you all went crazy at home too. All right. So regardless of negative or positive externalities, we see that sometimes government intervention is necessary to yield a socially efficient outcome. This is a very realistic extension of everything we've done so far this semester, and it's one of the most critical points we have to make, because markets are transcendently, fabulously awesome. But when they fail, the government needs to respond in an optimal fashion. We need to make sure that the market system, the places where it doesn't work right, operate as if they are efficient, as if they do work right, such that the whole system all works. Really, with externalities, what we're doing is filling in missing markets. When things really do impose costs or benefits, but no market exists, people will get hurt in some capacity. And so to make sure that we don't have that happen, we must efficiently regulate the externality. So I've posted a chapter 16 reading off Blackboard, and we can discuss that off these lectures. Have a wonderful day. Hope you're happy and healthy and safe out there. Feel free to contact me with any questions. Have a wonderful day.